the panel the black?
That's really wonderful.
Hi, John, honey. Nice to see you, yeah. Get chatty again. So I was just saying to Kristen there, like, what a gift this is for us. Like, I just don't know who's going to show up on a midsummer night, you know. And
Yeah.
it's great.
Quite a few people.
I got my call my friends are like, we're going to take you to France.
There's corn chowder, rolls, cupcakes,
second. I'm Lisa Pickering, here on staff, and I just want to welcome everyone. I just want to, before we start, I just want to let everyone know we have corn chowder, we have some sweets, coffee, water. So help yourself before we start. We'll give you a few minutes, and then we'll begin, okay? And we're so glad you're all here on this hot night, so have some hot chowder. Thanks for coming.
Hope you feel better. Thanks for watching while you're having this done.
Safeguard. Is it in Spanish? Is that how you pronounce it?
Well, good evening, everyone. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to St. Cecilia. I'm Father John, pastor here. It's nice to see everybody. Geez, we didn't know what kind of a turnout we were going to get here on Thursday night in the middle of the summer, and with all the things going on, and everybody shows up. So it's a great testimony to all of you, and not only to this community, but all those who are connected with all of us here this evening, one way or another. And it's also a testimony to our consideration and our thinking about and our wondering about all that's going on in our rapidly changing world, especially when it comes to AI and morality and ethics and all these light questions. So thanks for being here today, and thank you guys for being here today. You know, one of the biggest questions is what makes us human and what makes us different from so many other things. And tonight, we want to welcome you to basically a parish conversation on Pope Leo the 14th's encyclical on human dignity in the age of artificial intelligence. Just so happy that you're here, and I want to begin by welcoming our guest panelists, Berit Reisenauer Guidotti. Is that right? Did I say that with my fake Italian accent?
Great.
No, thank you. You're being kind. Thank you. How do you say it?
Well, if they don't say it like the Italians, they say Guidotti.
Guidotti? We got a paisan right here, so we're going with Guidotti. See?
Yeah,
All right.
The real Italian will say Guidotti.
Guidotti. So Berit is at Boston College, as is Professor Kristen Heyer and Father Andrea Vicini, all from Boston College. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am, and that we all are, that you're with us tonight to help us to learn with Pope Leo's help and guidance about these things. Number one, what it means to be human. Two, what makes us human. And three, to caution us about what can happen when we lose sight of what being human is. So those are pretty foundational, deep, and really important questions for us to look at. We gather this evening for a convo inspired by Pope Leo's encyclical on the human person, Magnifica Humanitas, Magnificent Humanity, and the challenges and the opportunities of emerging technologies, and tonight especially with artificial intelligence. Now, if you haven't read this encyclical yet, I was going to say you're in good company, but I don't know if my company is going to be called good company. But anyway, we're in company together because I haven't had a chance to fully read and digest it. And we do have copies available tonight. But I think that's exactly why this evening is so important. Despite the presence of these three very distinguished theologians, tonight's not an academic lecture. Instead, it's a conversation about a topic that applies to every one of us. What does it mean to be a person? How do we live together in good, in respectful, and in healthy ways? And how do we remain faithful to our dignity of being a human person in a rapidly changing world? So sometimes we're hearing that technology is advancing faster than our ethics, right, and our morality. Tonight, we'll just kind of look at and explore how our faith helps us to put this in perspective, how it frames it, helps us to catch up, and what it all means. So tonight, we're here to listen, certainly, to learn, and to share. We'll spend the next 7 hours or so thinking... I'm sorry, it's not a Sunday homily, I'm sorry. We'll spend the next 90 minutes or so thinking together about how these emerging technologies can really serve authentic human flourishing and the common good, and not just, these are my words now, the bottom line, right? So as we begin, let's take a moment to, I would say, invoke the source of real intelligence, not fake. I'm not saying that artificial is fake, but of our human, that's better, our human intelligence, as we begin our conversation tonight, invoking the source of all things. As we begin, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious God, you have created each and every one of us in your image, and that is the image of love. And you entrust to each of us the gifts of intellect, of creativity, and of that ability to discern. Lord, as we gather this evening, send your Holy Spirit upon each of us. Open our minds to truth, our hearts to wisdom, and our lives to your love. Guide our conversation tonight. May it be respectful and honest and fruitful, and help us to see more clearly what it means to be human in your sight. And we ask all this through Christ, our Lord. Amen. So tonight's format is going to be moderated conversation with our three panelists, and this is my debut as a moderator. So there'll be a period of questions and comments from the audience afterwards, but it's now my pleasure to introduce our three panelists. Our first panelist is Berit Guidotti. Berit's a doctoral candidate in theological ethics at Boston College. Her research focuses on emerging technologies, especially artificial intelligence, and it's all through the lens of Catholic social thought, with particular attention to the preferential option for the poor and feminist and liberation theologies. Berit has a professional background working as a management consultant in the technology and manufacturing industries. And Berit, we're very grateful to be with you here this evening, so thank you. Our second panelist is Professor Kristen Heyer, theologian at Boston College, where she teaches and writes in the field of theological ethics. Kristen's scholarship focuses on Catholic social teaching, migration, social inequality, and the big questions of justice, human dignity, and the moral responsibility in public life. She's widely recognized as one of the leading voices in Catholic social ethics today. And from June 2023 to June 2024, Kristen was president of the Catholic Theological Society of America. So Kristen serves as co-chair of the Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church, which is an international network of scholars and practitioners dedicated to advancing theological ethics really across the globe, right? And Professor Heyer has served as Director of Graduate Studies at Boston College Theology Department and is the inaugural Joseph Chair in Theology. Was Rick Galati in that chair at one point?
No, we have a number of Joseph chairs.
Oh,
Rick
okay.
is the Joseph Chair in Systematic Theology.
Oh, systematic.
But I know a parishioner of happy memory.
Very happy memory. Well, Kristen, we're delighted to have you with us this evening, so thank you. And lastly, our third panelist is Father Andrea Vicini, a Jesuit priest, physician, ethicist, and theologian. Boy, do I feel this guy. Father Vicini serves as chair of the theology department at Boston College. His work brings together theology, bioethics, and contemporary science and medicine with particular attention to questions regarding human dignity, human vulnerability, and technological change, all with global health as a perspective. As both physician and moral theologian, he brings a unique perspective to the ethical questions surrounding artificial intelligence and really the future of healthcare. Before joining the theology department of BC, Father Vicini taught in Italy, Albania, Mexico, Chad, and France. And he serves as co-chair of the Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church and is widely recognized for his scholarship in theological bioethics, in public health, emerging biotechnologies, environmental ethics, and moral theology. So, Andrea, grazie. Thank you for being with us this evening, all three of you. As I said at the beginning, many of us here, myself included, haven't had a chance to really study the encyclical in detail. So we'd like to begin this evening really at the most basic level, invite our panelists to invite us into entering the conversation. So I'm going to address our first questions, if you will, to all three of you. Pope Leo's first encyclical has drawn attention both within the church and beyond. And for those who may be less familiar with the term, can one or more of our panelists tell us what exactly an encyclical is, and why do these documents matter? And what's the significance of this being Pope Leo's first encyclical?
When we think about the documents within the church, we think at different levels of authority. We begin from the top level of authority, that are the documents of the Second Vatican Council. And then, just under it, we have the encyclicals. So, a document that indicates how, for the Pope, the issues that are addressed in the encyclical deserve attention. And we have seen in recent encyclical letters an attention to engage in dialogue on different topics, not only with the believers, not only with the members of the Catholic Church, but with the whole world. So just to give us a sense of the importance of the topic and the importance of what the Pope invites us to join as in terms of a conversation. And of course, we have other levels of documents. Think of a normal address to a conference or to a gathering of an association, or a homily, or a greeting. So we see how, for Pope Leo, the topic of artificial intelligence deserves our attention and deserves the engagement of the believers and of the whole world.
Perhaps I would just briefly add that Pope Leo's namesake, Pope Leo XIII, wrote an encyclical in 1891, Rerum Novarum, similarly looking at the signs of the times. One or new ethical issues arising at the time of then the Industrial Revolution. And so this Leo, our Leo, issued this on the 135th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. This is something popes often do with encyclicals. Sometimes they're even named just the 40th year, dating previous encyclicals. I do think that's important because many encyclicals will draw upon predecessors. You see in this encyclical some interesting other sources, but I think there's typically attention to continuity in the tradition, in the gifts of the faith being brought to new social questions. For instance, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and not all encyclicals are actually addressing social questions either. So this is in the line of Catholic social thought specifically. So Laudato Si is another good example of an encyclical that's addressing the social questions related to the climate crisis.
Thank you. I was also thinking, Andrea, this isn't just for Catholics only, right? So it's to engage the world. And I was just wondering, I'm off script here, but like how open is the world to, you know, what the Pope's saying as a moral and ethical voice? Anyone?
When the encyclical was presented to the world, we had a few new highlights, we could say. First, the Pope was there, and he was engaging in a conversation, and he was contributing to highlight the importance of what had just been published, but also invited someone who works in the field of artificial intelligence. There's been a sort of criticism why this person, why this company and not other companies. I would say that we shouldn't look at this participation at the press release of the encyclical as a sort of negative element or a sort of preferential attention given to one company instead of others. But it is, if you want, a symbol. It is emblematic of a willingness to engage in a conversation. And the Vatican, in other ways, has been involved in accompanying the progress of reflection on artificial intelligence in over 10 years. No, under the radar, but always with persons coming from corporations, from technology, from philosophy, from theology, creating a series of conversations every year, and then inviting also to publish documents that could prepare the thinking of the Pope, and they could contribute to create a sort of possibility for further dialogue. So this is, if you want, one element in a journey of reflection on artificial intelligence that, you know, again, confirms a style, the willingness to engage in a conversation with those who work day after day on these issues, or us as users, in this case, of these technologies.
Thank you. Well, our first question, even though we just had a question that was kind of broad, but the first question, artificial intelligence raises many practical questions just about technology, work, education, just even daily life. But before we ask what technology can do, perhaps we might ask a deeper question. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? So I'm going to address this question to Berit. Magnificat Humanitas places the dignity of the human person at the center of the conversation, right? That's the foundation of Catholic social teaching, right? That each person has dignity. And for the benefit of those who may be encountering this document for the first time, I'm going to ask you, Berit, what's Pope Leo inviting us to consider when he speaks about the need to safeguard the human person in the age of emerging technologies? And really, how does our Catholic understanding of human dignity kind of shape the way we're going to approach artificial intelligence?
Thank you. Yeah. So I actually thought when I first saw the title of the encyclical that the word safeguarding It's not really a colloquial term. I'm not running around saying, like, I'm safeguarding this. At least I'm not. I don't know about you. But I was chatting with a friend who's another wonderful theologian and whose first language is Spanish, and she told me the Spanish translation of the encyclical, that word is custodia. And often in that context, or in Spanish-speaking contexts, that's a verb that's used to describe what guardian angels do. And I thought that was a really beautiful image in thinking or appealing to maybe a little bit what Pope Leo is pointing at, which is that there is something about where we are in the world right now that we need to be attentive to, maybe protected from, or perhaps there's something that is worth protecting, something that's worth being protected. And so I think in Pope Leo's terms in the encyclical, the way, if you're gonna do an academic summary, his problem statement, the way he sets it up is that the problem are the distorting effects of technological power. And what that means more specifically is that there's a centralization of this kind of power in ways that aren't always conducive to human flourishing and the common good. And that means something for human dignity. So the what that's being protected is our ways of being interdependent, relational creatures made by God for lives rooted in love. I've got my little notes here. And responsible for caring for creation and for one another. He's saying we're relational beings, and at the core of being relational, there's something that's really important that's rising to the surface in the way that our world is being shaped by ourselves and by others now that we have these very powerful forms of technology. So I think that's where I would start. There's a lot more, he says, about human dignity that's really important, and I know you've thought a lot about it, so I'm going to actually pass it off to you so you can talk about human dignity specifically.
Thank you, Merritt. I agree with you that he's concerned about these distorting effects of AI on our inherently relational creatureliness. I think for me, the most beautiful framing of human dignity in this document is Pope Leo's insistence that we are magnificent through and not in spite of our limits, our fragility. And I think the optimization and the human maxing of AI and some of these new technologies really works against that. I think also, in addition to these distorting and isolating effects of technology, this encyclical is also pushing back against contexts of domination, false narratives of domination. And I couldn't help but think in our own US context with our first US Pope of a context of meritocracy, where we're really swimming in these narratives that we pull up our bootstraps and make our own fate. Or if we're economic losers, it's because of our vices. And so I think centering human dignity not only in terms of relationality, intrinsic goodness. He has a fancy theological phrase, ontological dignity, in the encyclical. Really just pointing out that this is the dignity we bear as humans just purely by being human, right? By being willed, created, and loved by God. I think, though, like I say, I also was really drawn to this sense that within our limitations is where we find a place for compassion, for mercy, for forgiveness. That transcending all our limits really isn't the goal, according to the Christian story. And so relations that liberate, communion that transforms, these are not optimizable via technology. And I think, there's been a lot of wonderful work in disability ethics by Andrea and our colleagues that points out this importance of finitude and fragility. But I think anyone in this room can imagine ways in which our regular challenges in our lives, our struggles, our diagnoses, our rest, have been places of deep meaning and encounter with God. Precisely through those struggles. I even thought of recent public theologian who's now been quashed, fellow Tolkien lover Stephen Colbert, who has famously talked about grief in this way. I love the thing that I most wish had not happened. He talks about with the death of his family members. You may have seen this. And I found that in the encyclical, right? To extinguish suffering, to fully optimize, is also to extinguish love, to extinguish desire, to take it out of that infinite horizon. That was a long answer. I won't do that again.
Just a couple of addition to what Berit and Christine indicated. Thinking about technological development, we think about possibilities, but also challenges and threats. Threats to humankind, particularly those who are more vulnerable, threats to the planet. And so we could say that Pope Leo invites us to trust in our ability to face these threats, to address these challenges, and to find a way in which we embrace what we think is important for us and for the whole planet. So a vision of justice, a vision of good, a vision of flourishing for the persons and for the planet. So it seems to me that is really showing how trust is something that we can construct together, that we can continue to build and protect. And it will help us, trusting our ability to face these challenges will help us to overcome them and to use the technology in ways that are beneficial for us and the planet.
Thank you. I sometimes wonder about others who, I'm not judging, but I just wonder about others who don't come from that perspective, you know, that it's about human flourishing or taking care of each other, but it's really about the means by which we're interested in. You know, it's the shadow side to so much that's happening with this. Second question. One of the central themes in Pope Leo's encyclical is that human beings are created in the image of God, Imago Dei. And because we're made in the image of our Creator, we're also generative, right? We wouldn't be here if the generative process wasn't taking place. So God's created us and entrusted us with this remarkable capacity to really imagine, to create, to discover, to build, and to bring about new possibilities that can contribute to the flourishing of others and not just our own self-benefit. Scriptures remind us that the question isn't only what are we capable of building, it's also why we build and to whom will our gifts ultimately be of service. And what he does is he contrasts two biblical images, the Tower of Babel and then Nehemiah. And I had to be reminded of good old Nehemiah. Huh? In Babel, human creativity, it was kind of turned inward, right? Seeking power, glory that was apart from God. Nehemiah, those same human gifts were placed at the service of God and the rebuilding of community. So looking at those two divergent approaches with the gifts that we've been given. So here's the question, and this is for all three of you. As we look at such rapid development of artificial intelligence, which of these images do you think best describes the moment that we're currently in? Are we building a Tower of Babel? Rebuilding Jerusalem? Or somewhere in between, perhaps? Any thoughts? Wow, that
I
was
guess
that
we-
was smooth,
we all,
man.
We
That
all
was
get
really
to
smooth.
say something about it. So we've got three options: are we building a Tower of Babel, rebuilding Jerusalem, or perhaps living somewhere in between? I will say I'm chronically conflicted in my answer to this. I think when I was wiping off my 3-year-old's bloody knee and elbow this afternoon, instead of preparing all of my coherent answers to these questions fully in advance, I was reflecting on the ways that there are so many opportunities for us in our lives, in our daily lives, to do exactly what Pope Leo invites us to do in the idea of rebuilding Jerusalem, which is where he says we're invited to build a civilization of love. What that rebuilding looks like is appropriate to each of us in our own context, in our own places. And so whether or not we're actually doing it, the opportunity is there. And I think what Leo offers is an invitation to move forward in ways that do treat seriously questions of human flourishing and the common good and the way we design technologies, but not just the designers, in the way that you invite Alexa into your home, the way you teach your children to speak to Alexa or don't speak to Alexa. In my case, we don't have Alexa in our home. But there's actually something, I think, I said when I began that I'm chronically conflicted in my answer to this, because I think it's much easier for me to find examples where I don't actually think the way that we're developing technologies are always in service to human flourishing. But I find a lot of hope in the ways that small tech actually creates opportunities for that. So I'll give one example, then I'll hand it off. I really appreciate the work of some folks who are at MIT, actually, who have partnered with an organization in Latin America of women who are helping to document cases of violence against women and feminicide. And one of the challenges that those activists have found is under-documentation of those kinds of activities. And so what they've done is they try to collect information from places online and elsewhere of these under-documented cases to try to organize and put public pressure on the state to say, actually, this is a reality in the context we're working in. And this group at MIT said, there's ways that we can actually help you find these cases and collect this information online using a machine learning algorithm, using AI to help you in the work that you're doing. So there's a problem of underreporting in data. There's a problem in the kind of politics that's created here, but also there's an opportunity to be able to build something that's in service to the kind of organization that's possible. So in a small way, it's not transforming the entire system that is the reality that there's violence against women, right? But there is something that's possible there of each person doing their part to be more loving, to build what might be a better civilization of love. So chronically conflicted is my answer, but there's possibilities.
Thank you, Barrett. I think learning from Barrett in these years helps move me toward chronically conflicted from babble. I appreciated those metaphors, and I do live in hope. But I think the Tower of Babel, or he even coins Babel syndrome in the encyclical, I found one of the most helpful takeaways from reading this, because I think Pope Leo exposes the lie of neutrality, exposes the lie of objectivity, and just shows how negative forms of technology, different forms of technology, are insinuated into our lives and in our thinking and in our outlook without even our awareness. That we're losing even the ability to differentiate more and more. In early COVID, I watched the docudrama, The Social Dilemma. Did anybody see The Social Dilemma? And to be honest, this was like my first window into the complex machinations of social media, of surveillance capitalism. I mean, maybe this is clear to everyone, and my two colleagues here know a lot more about this. But I think Pope Leo shows us that baked into these structures are really problematic modes of labor injustice, environmental devastation. I think he shows us that there are cultural mindsets that help us to kind of go with the flow, go along with these sinful structures or sinful choices. He talks about narratives of posthumanism, but also technocracy, the normalization of war, content manipulation, misinformation, and really the ways that the privileged few who design and control digital platforms shape our collective imagination. And so they're able to present a particular view of reality as desirable. And I think, I mean, I do write on sin a lot, but I think I just worry, like as a teacher, in thinking about how to deal with Claude and ChatGPT, as a parent, I think I'm more on the side of the fear of the Tower of Babel. So I'm happy to be reinvited to Nehemiah as well.
Andrea, just one second. So when you talk about the problem of neutrality and objectivity, what do you flesh that out just a little bit? Yeah.
Sorry.
No, please. I hope that's appropriate. I don't know if anybody else. Okay.
Sure. I think this is an encyclical not just about responding to particular things happening, like discrete technological advances, but also about how AI imposes its own moral vision. And I think it's easy to think that that's just science, or that's just the way things are, when certain new technologies amplify the power of the haves against the have-nots, isolate us from those in need, kind of push this optimized human-maxing vision of the person. And I think this encyclical is saying technology itself is perhaps not the problem, but the vision that underlies it. And so that's what I mean by neutrality, like an ability not to see an idol as an idol. And I feel that Leo expertly kind of exposes that in this encyclical. Does that help?
Is that helpful for folks? But when you use like the lie of neutrality and objectivity, the very first Netflix movie I ever saw was The Social Dilemma. My niece, I couldn't do it. My niece set me up on the Netflix. I've been paying for it forever, but I've seen like 6 movies, and that was the first one, in 20 years or whatever it's been. It's wild, but you just kind of, I wonder, so who sets the tone? That's why I said in the beginning, not fake intelligence, artificial intelligence, but God is the architect, in my book, of all intelligence and being, and sets that moral code that we've had, taught to us over the eons, through a religious expression. But, who's kind of behind this, it's kind of like the financial system. I'm way off the card here, by the way, but it's like the financial system, it's in many ways, I think, set up. Is that right? I mean, I'm an right-brain English major guy, but I'm starting to realize as I get older, even all that's set up and it favors, and but I just thought it kind of came from God. You know what I mean? It was a system based on justice and fairness and equity for all people. So, and I think we're in this area maybe in a similar way.
Exactly.
I would like to add one thing. At the beginning and at the end, Pope Leo invites us to see these 2 different ways that are exemplified by these 2 biblical images. Babel, the ambition, the pride, building a tower that reaches up to the sky to show the power. And then Nehemiah, on the contrary, that one step after another tries to rebuild Jerusalem together with others, so a collaborative effort. And in chapter 5, he uses sort of more an unpacking of these 2 images, creating a contrast between the culture of power and the civilization of love. One further thought maybe could go to Babel. we could ask, what happens when God intervenes, responding to this attempt, to create something powerful? And as the biblical text tells us, they were speaking the same language. But what is the outcome? What is God's response? The division of languages, the multiplicity of languages, and as we know, languages mean culture. So we could say that what for many seems to be God's punishment, in the reality is a blessing. God shows that God is able to find ways to create something good out of what we do that is not good at all, that is an attempt to God's divinity. So it seems to me that this is a possible key to interpret what Pope Leo invites us to do. We could look at artificial intelligence as an ambition of power to solidify existing corporate powers, capitalist dynamics, colonial abuses, and so on. But maybe God can help us, and together we can find ways in which, on the contrary, we create opportunities for this technology to be at the service of a vision that is beneficent for humankind, that is building a civilization of love.
Grazie. Tutti. It's fantastic. Question 3, to all those interested in the civilization of love. Pope Leo reminds us that our decisions about technology are never simply private decisions. They really affect our families, our relationships, workplaces, communities, ultimately the whole human family. So Catholic social teaching always talks about the common good. It's a phrase that we hear frequently, but maybe we don't always stop to think about and define it. So first, and this is for all of you, what does Catholic social teaching mean when it refers to the common good? And then second, as we think about artificial intelligence, what does it mean to ask whether these technologies are serving the common good? And in your judgment, might it be possible, is it possible for artificial intelligence to help build a society that's more just, more humane, and more attentive to the dignity of every human person? I don't know, what might that look like?
Okay, just to begin, I think that see, she's the technology expert. I'm just the Catholic social teaching friend. The basic idea that we can know a good in common that we cannot know alone is central to the Catholic social tradition, but again, very countercultural, as I said before, in a pretty individualistic society. I think in this encyclical, I appreciate Leo tying Catholic social teaching principles like the common good, like solidarity, the good of each and the good of all, not just to kind of ethical frameworks and applications, but backwards to Christian doctrine. So he wants to make clear we have a social understanding of salvation. Like this commitment from the common good didn't drop from the sky in a list of 9 favorite principles of Catholic social thought. But if we believe that we are social beings, that we were created for relationship, and that we're saved together, John Sobrino often talked about this, we do not go to God alone. Leo cites Martin Luther King Jr. in a piece on social movements. We as a people will get to the promised land. I know that he wasn't Catholic, but he's in this encyclical. So this sense that the common good, I think, means exposing what I was saying a minute ago. He writes, the common good means exposing new forms of economic and political and epistemic asymmetries and naming these new monopolies of AI. They're not serving us as a whole. They're making the few more wealthy and powerful.
What are some of the larger social questions that, Kristen, that's actually more of a follow-up to you, like that we should be asking?
I think a connected principle that he writes a lot about in here is the universal destination of created goods. He acknowledges that we do have a right to private property in the Catholic social tradition, but that right is never absolute. And so it has a social mortgage on it, right? The goods of the earth are really intended for the common good, intended for everyone, not who can get there first. And so in this new AI age, that means ways of ensuring access to these new technologies, as well as the education needed to go along with them. It means thinking about data and resources and regulatory influences, not just material goods when we apply these principles. And I think, again, it means attending to the often hidden, exploited sources of labor when it comes to the actual individuals who are sustaining algorithmic systems. I was impressed that he said repeatedly, he lifts up social justice repeatedly, which has not always been in fashion. At least I can remember teaching not too long ago in some of my Catholic social teaching classes, secular news commentators warning of the dangers of that concept, aligning it with communism and socialism, kind of go and see if your parish bulletin refers to social justice. He's very forthright in talking about social justice as a key dimension of the tradition, and ways in which it is not just something we attend to after technologies are perfected, and then it's a matter of just distribution, but rather a condition that needs to be shaping the very design from the outset. So I think he's asking questions that are really baked into the process, not afterthoughts. And I think the other important social question, again, is the question of vision. I think he gives a critique of the vision, both behind certain technologies and fostered by these technologies, and is suggesting that actually Catholic social thought, he uses the phrase Catholic social doctrine, which I also think is significant, has a pretty different vision to offer as an alternative.
So that's really wonderful. Thank you. No, but I'm going to build on what you said and what Andrea actually said in his response to the last question, that there's something very distinctive for Leo in how he talks about the common good that is different from how we engage with each other online. So I'm going to talk about political polarization for a second, because if you spend any time on Facebook or on just about any social network, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, what's being commoditized there, what's being consumed by the algorithm is your attention. And the way that happens is by riling you up, by making you feel afraid, by making you feel left out, or making you want something. It's working on our emotions, right? There's something very different for Leo in his conception of the common good that says the way that we're made to be in community with one another is locally rooted. It's pluralistic. The way that you're going to say artificial intelligence in Boston is not how you say it in Silicon Valley. And actually, that's incredibly meaningful in the concept of the common good. The reason it's meaningful is because what happens when a community in Boston, a community in Nigeria, a community in Silicon Valley gets together and asks, what does it mean to live together well? The answer is going to be a little bit Boston, a little bit Silicon Valley, a little bit Nigeria, and not one of them all the time in the same way. So there's a concept of pluralism for Leo in the common good that means everyone has a responsibility to care for living together well, but how you do that, both in Boston, as like, do you care about bike lanes? What is your opinion? You may have really strong opinions, or you may not care at all, is going to look different depending on where you are, but there's coordinated responsibilities in that. And he says that means it's not an activity of homogenization. It's not making everyone the same. It's recognizing that there's a real richness in that diversity, that when you come together to try and address real big problems, it's not about squashing that or making it all the one thing. It's about a good that transcends as a consequence of working together in that way. And I think that that's actually a really beautiful contribution. It's building on work that Pope Francis has done. It's building on contributions in terms of cooperation with popular movements that Pope Francis did. But I actually think it's a real, it's an important move in the way that we're thinking about the common good. That's not saying this is a universal ideal that you can just come up with as a, for anyone who loves Kant in the room, a Kantian external observer. Not that people really love Kant. No, some people do. So yeah, that's what I'll say there about the common good. I think there's a real value to pluralism that's important. Whether you say artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence, what do we say it?
They're saying the Boston accent's disappearing, right?
That's perhaps an algorithmic consequence.
Just a couple of words to sum up. Catholic social doctrine is very ambitious and bold. It assumes that we can figure out what is good for everyone, everywhere, in a very inclusive and comprehensive way. And so it presupposes that we need to figure out together. We need to discern together what is good in ways that are not only good for me, or for us, or for my friends, or my group, or my party, or my church, but for everyone. And so there is a sort of demanding work that needs to be done to figure this out. But again, there is the trust that we have the ability of not only reaching out, trying to define it, but also to make it happen.
Kristen, you said the Pope highlighted the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and you said he's not Catholic. And you know, we always try to highlight him and women and others, you know, because it's, as you just said, for the good of all. We're all human beings in this, and I think we can just get a little bit, I don't know, is it parochial or narrow in our view? And like, there's so many people in history and in the world who've modeled these ways of being, maybe not have used this language at all, but you know, we're in this together in that way. It is ambitious and bold, as you said, this task, but it's for us all. Barrett, I don't know if you tapped into this a little bit, but as algorithms do shape, like I start using words sometimes like I've been using them my whole life. I don't even know what the heck they mean. Like, I don't know, how does an algorithm work, right? Like all that kind of stuff. But with so much that's shaped by algorithms and systems that people don't fully understand, human responsibility, moral freedom, like I was thinking, I'm off the script again, but like I'm thinking about kids, right? Like professors. You can be like, you didn't write this. Well, how do you know I didn't write it? Well, that would have been me. But anyway, how do you know I didn't write this? You know, like what does it mean for the future, and like how the synapses connect, like how the brain's going to work? I mean, that's a whole other panel, right? Like what that means, you know, and how thinking is changing and learning is changing, and processing and all that for like kids, grandkids, these next generations, and then the whole value system, ethically and moral, like, I don't know, do you have a word on that? I know I'm wicked off script, but.
Yeah, well, happy to.
You got a 3-year-old with a scraped knee, you know?
No, here's the thing. I actually think Catholics in market terms have a competitive advantage here because we're really obsessed with formation. We talk about conscience. We talk about what's like, we catechize children starting at a really early age. We actually think that humans are formed in community with one another and through things that we teach. And we've been thinking that for a long time. Catholic education has a long history here, right? That's actually a really important insight to say that we are formed by our social relationships, we're formed by education, we're formed by encounter with others, we're formed by really negative experiences with others. And so we have resources there within the tradition that are helpful for thinking about this. I will say, algorithms are forming us all day, every day. When you see something online that presents to you a picture of another person, there's a political activity that's going on there. It's surfacing a kind of relationship to you that was not possible before social media. There's a great study came out a couple of weeks ago from some economists in New York, and they got the data from AT&T, which was the first cell phone network to get the iPhone. And they were able to cross-reference rates of sexual activity with the expansion of access to iPhones across the United States. And can anyone guess? People had less sex in the same areas that AT&T had iPhones. There is a kind of power there that shapes human relationships, how we connect with one another, what we expect from each other, where we spend our time. And so the ways that we're being formed are not always obvious to us, but they are happening. And it's not just happening on a one-to-one level, it's happening on a global scale. There's an entire system involved here with who you see and who you don't see as part of that process. So in order to get those algorithms, you need data labelers and trainers who are also looking at things like sexually explicit imagery all day long to make sure that that's not being shown to people. And that's kind of, again, a political system that's involved with what we see and what we don't see. Social media is a helpful example, but this is happening in a lot of different domains. I mean, for anyone who's bought a car in the past 6 to 7 years, much of your driving information is being collated and sent to insurers and has probably jacked up your car insurance rates, whether you know it or not. So are we being formed? Yes. How are we being formed? A ton of different ways. Can we figure out what to do about it? Also yes, because we can be attentive to this and ask what the alternative possibilities are.
Wow. So when I was driving, I won't even give you the numbers, down 95 to be here on time for the meeting today, that's going to jack up my insurance, I can tell you that right now.
Depends on what year you bought your car.
No, Mamma mia. All right. So, you know, and again, this is maybe worth something in the fall as we kind of explore just the influence of artificial intelligence. But, you know, I talk a lot with, and I listen to, I should have said that first, a bunch in the younger generation, and especially when you talked about sexually explicit imagery. Like, that's, from what I'm unintentionally gleaning, shifting the way people relate. There are intimacy issues, performance, all that human stuff is, I mean, like that's a whole other realm that I think is fascinating, you know, because it's right there in that phone, and it's just not real, you know. It's not, again, what I think was intended. But anyway, that's for later. Andrea, as a physician and a theologian, you spent much of your career thinking about how science and how medicine serve us as human beings. Where do you see artificial intelligence genuinely contributing to what you mentioned earlier, the human flourishing and the healing mission of medicine? And I don't know, with some real attention to ensure that any technological process never comes at the expense of human presence or compassion, accompaniment, or even sound moral judgment. What do you think regarding medicine and healing?
So the first thing I would say is that health is a good, and should be a good that is available to everyone who needs access to that good. So we see here the responsibility that we have to create the conditions for this good to be available to everyone. And then I would say that we can think about health in multiple ways. Healthcare practice, in clinical settings, the patient-physician or patient-healthcare professional interaction as a first example. But then, and there is a pandemic help us to realize it, there are two other dimensions of health that are inseparable. That is public health, the health in the territory, and the conditions that protect the health of the territory. Think of pollution, think of the chemicals, think of the quality of the food, the water, etc. And then the third level is global health. So we could say that we could identify ways in which artificial intelligence could be at the service of each one of these three areas of health, fostering the promotion of health as a good. But we need to be vigilant and see if this is happening or not. Is artificial intelligence a tool that can help the patient healthcare professional interaction, creating more space for human interaction in those contexts? That's possible. Certainly we could find ways in which we use artificial intelligence to elaborate data that help us to see what is the quality of the air that we breathe, and then what are the changes that climate change is causing and how we are trying or not to respond to them. And then on the global scale, we could say, again, we can elaborate data on the patterns, for example, in climate, and how affect human life and other forms of life on the planet. At the same time, as in the case of every tool, we need to see if we are using it in ways that are not at the service of this vision of health as a good. And so, are we using it to foster powers that create further gaps and inequities in access to health and healthcare services, or in privileging those who have already plenty of privileges and creating further conditions for inequities on the planet? So it seems to me that, again, in the case of health, we could say artificial intelligence could help us to foster research, to test drugs, to reach the outcome of having vaccines that are effective in a shorter term, creating conditions for testing drugs without reaching immediately the human level of trials, and so on. So again, it will depend on our ingenuity and creativity to see how, and our vigilance, to see how we may use these possible new technologies, and also be able to say that maybe we do not want to use them in some particular cases. So using our discernment and our experience to shape the implementation and uses of artificial intelligence when we think about health in these three different ways.
Thank you. I am telling you, I am being edified by the moment, even more than France, Morocco tonight. So I really mean this. What a gift to have you all here, and to have all of you.
Brother John a score update?
No, don't be silly. All right, the fourth question. I really mean that. One of the most practical questions that people ask about AI is how it's going to affect our work. Am I going to have a job, right? I put all this time and energy and into this field. What am I going to have in the future? But in the Christian tradition, work, as we know, has never simply been about earning the bucks, a living. It's one of the ways in which we participate in the ongoing work of creation. We use our gifts in service to others. Remember the Hobbit movies and all, Lord of the, not the Flies, the Rings, right? Did I just date myself there terribly? But anyway, my precious, you know what I mean? It's always at the service of others. Do we use our gifts in these ways and contribute to the common good. So as AI becomes more capable of performing tasks that once required only human skill and creativity, what are the questions that we should be asking about the future of human work, the future of human creativity? And how do we make sure that that technology kind of continues to serve, be at the service of the human person, rather than reducing people to what we can produce? That's for all three of you.
Maybe I'll start and then pass it along. I think what you just pointed out is really important, that work in the Catholic social tradition is not just about the bottom line, right? Certainly there are a lot of teachings in Catholic social thought about just remuneration and the right to join unions, and I think those economic justice elements are important, but I think an understanding of work as intelligent and free and how we communicate in society is pretty countercultural and important. So that as the backdrop. And Pope Leo goes into that in the encyclical. Work is not just an instrument, he writes, it expresses and enhances the dignity of our lives. I often talk to my students about if you know somebody who has been out of work for a prolonged period of time, I mean, certainly it's financially stressful, but it also really can sap at our sense of self, sap at our dignity. So I think when we look at new technologies that might promise goods in terms of automation, but is actually, as he writes, de-skilling some laborers, leading to unemployment, leading to practices, Barrett has written about surveillance, that it's really not just a matter of distributive injustice, but attacking the very core of human dignity. So these labor questions, I think, are really serious and really central to the tradition. I think, yeah, maybe I'll leave it to you all to, I'm talking too much, to apply further. See what you guys want to add, or to Andre.
In chapter 4, Pope Leo invites us to ways in which, in light of what he has prepared in previous chapters, the relevance and significance of the Catholic social doctrine, we can more in detail address the challenges, and among them there is work. The other two are truth and freedom. So ways in which we protect who we are and the planet demands for Pope Leo that we re-embrace the value of truth in our social life. We protect work and create opportunities for families and young generations to see that they can contribute. They have the possibility of working. And then finally, freedom. So three, if you want, signposts that will help us to address concretely the challenges. And again, when we think about work, we think also about the dark side of work, the exploitation, the way in which, as colonial powers, we continue to extract from the global south in terms of riches, in terms of human work. Think about healthcare, the way in which we attract healthcare workers for the global south, because we create for them better opportunities that at the moment they have in their own countries. So we think about a reality that really needs to be converted, needs to be transformed. And it is urgent that we address what concerns work, because work is inseparable from who we are as human beings. Even if I cannot work, work is still part of the social fabric. So even if I'm unable to work because of age or because of my disability or because of sickness, I still benefit for the work that makes life of everyone possible. So it is a shared responsibility as Pope Leo invites us to think about work.
I'll add a couple of things here. Sometimes I get irritated about idealized versions of work when we talk about it as a good for people. Because to your point, the reality is for many people, work is not dignified work. It's not decent work. It's not something that is constitutive to our well-being in the ways that we want to have this vision for. And I think the demand for us then is to ask what is our part in thinking about work differently, whether that's through the design of our businesses, whether it's through the way that we compensate people, whether it's through the recognition of forms of labor that have not traditionally been considered work. I had a dear, lovely undergraduate student 2 years ago tell me that women didn't work until they entered the workforce, like 60 years ago or something. And I was literally had to stop for probably a minute and a half and figure out what to say, because that's patently untrue, right? So if you think about all of the different kinds of labor that actually do exist in the world, what do we think is dignified, decent labor? And what are the possibilities for technology to be in service to creating different economic models? I have suspicions of trying to solve every social problem with a technology. I don't think that's actually how we can go about reshaping our economic interactions, but I do think there's opportunities if you're a business owner, if you work in a small business, if you're thinking about going to business school, to really hone in on what opportunities there are in Catholic thought. If you're curious, I'll plug my husband's research for a minute here. He runs a project at Harvard Business School called the Ownership Project that looks at alternative modes of ownership for businesses, and really creative ways to think about both everything from cooperatives to land trusts to how you think about the ownership of media. Work is not always good work, but there is an opportunity for that. And then one more thing on the topic of de-skilling, which you mentioned. It is true that using technologies like ChatGPT to create things for you changes your brain. It changes the way that you think in the world. It changes the way that you write. It makes it harder for you to create in the same ways that you would before. And so recognition that that's possible in the kinds of ways that you are engaging, I think a question you can ask yourself is, does this feel too frictionless? Was this too easy for me to do? And if it does, take that to heart and ask yourself, maybe there's something here that needs to be a little bit more challenging. Because something that's true about work is that we grow and learn in that process. It's one of the goods that come from work. So de-skilling happens in this experience of, I can just pump out whatever I want, and then at the end of the day, maybe actually isn't what you wanted because you didn't know coming in the door.
So, all these new words that come out, like, what did you say, something smacking or maxing or something? Human maxing and de-skilling and all these different things, right? So what about that relationship between creativity and AI? Like, these kids at Berkeley, I was talking with one of the professors the other day, and like, with technology now, and I'm with my friend's kid is a budding musician, and the business behind that, and what happens with the labels, and what happens if you go independent, and this, that, and the other thing, and how music is produced and the sound. I was like, what? You're not just up there strumming your guitar, and it's wild. And then even lyrics and all that. So creativity, right? Imagining things and thinking things, all the stuff that I'm guessing that most of us have been encouraged to do in our educational process and growing up. What happens to that? What's the relationship between creativity and being human? Here's a quick case in point, and it's a wicked, raw, basic. It's probably not even worthy of this night. My father, a long time ago, used to always say, Johnny, You have an incredible sense of direction. You're very observant. I'm like, Dad, take this left. No. And I was right. You know what I mean? But if you're in the car with me, you're like, Johnny, take this left. I'd be like, well, I'm not so sure, because my brain has changed. I know where I'm going, all this, but I pop that thing in, right? Google Maps or whatever we use, Waze, all this kind of stuff. Now, I kid myself saying I'm using that because I want to see what the traffic is or how much time or all that. Like, and those are all helpful things from this. But it's like I'm losing a piece of, and that's a stupid little thing like directions in driving today, right? That the younger generation, that's just normal. But for us, what about with the bigger, the deeper, greater things, like these arias that come out, these great anyway, what's the relationship there? What's happening?
Yeah, my 2 dissertation committee members here can tell you I've been on my GPS shtick for like a decade now. Yeah, actually using GPS does change your geospatial awareness, your brain's awareness of what's happening in the world around you. And it actually changes also the relationship you have to your local neighborhood, to what you notice, to what you pay attention to how you relate. That's a really good example of, is this too easy, actually? Is this frictionless? Is this experience of navigation a little bit easier than maybe I want it to be? On the topic of art and creativity, my sister works in LA in film, and for her entire life, she's always been told, oh, you're so creative, and she hates it because like all of her friends in LA have had this experience. It's true, they are incredibly creative, and the things that come out of their minds are incredibly beautiful and wonderful and reflective of the human experience and on relationship. And I think there is something lost when we assume that what is produced mechanically is comparable to what is produced in a contemplative, creative act. Whether it's the same in substance when you look at it is not really the question. For me, it's whether there was a journey that happened in the process. My sister helped collaborate on a film that looked at people with disabilities who wanted to kind of dance in public and who did different performances. And they had all of these different moral decisions that they made in the process of making this film. Which people would they platform? Whose stories would they tell? Which ones were valuable? Was it just the people who were making money off of their performances? Or was it the people who were dancing for joy too? And so that is actually constitutive of creativity in a way that a film produced by Fable 5 model on people with disabilities who dance would never have that experience as a community of making together. So, yeah, that's what I'll say there.
Do you want us each to answer that or no?
You know what? Actually, Kristen, I have a quick question for you. How do we ensure that well, you really touched on it. Yeah, you actually answered it pretty fully. Unless you want to say something. Do you want to say something what Barrett said? Please, 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 please. We're on time.
Okay, you want to go first and I'll go second? Yeah.
Google already changed our way of being creative, but affecting how we look for answers, and we don't need to do the work of finding the answers. And artificial intelligence, Claude, ChatGPT, has made that even more exponential. We don't need to think about how to write a homily. No, we just ask ChatGPT to prepare the homily. It means, or we need, to prepare a sort of outline of a presentation, and we ask ChatGPT. Or we need to decide what to prepare for dinner, and we ask Claude to say what I prepare for dinner. Now, what are the problems of this? When we think about students, we think a loss of creative thinking, curiosity, ingenuity, and also going to the library, finding answers, books, or reading, trying to find the answer to the question. But also, we could say there is a way in which the relationship between trust and truth has changed. For this reason, I think it is important what Pope Leo writes in chapter 4. I can give you an anecdote as an example. Outside my office, there are 4 chairs, and the students sit there, when they need to, take exams, midterms exams or finals, particularly if the professor is interrogating them nearby. And I was shocked by hearing one student saying, he was a philosophy student, so it was a philosophical question. He said, this is the answer. ChatGPT said that is the answer. When everyone who knows these technologies knows that they hallucinate. I can give you another example. A student had to prepare a critical synthesis for one section of the course, Ethics of Global Public Health and the Common Good. An excellent student, with double major, really outstanding. And I asked them, prepare a critical synthesis from your point of view on these readings that we read together. So the readings are there. And then she placed the critical synthesis that she prepared and the bibliography with those readings in ChatGPT and submitted it. It was evident that it was totally crazy. Even the bibliography was just, completely artificial. It was evident. If these are the 5 readings and these are all mixed up, it means that something has created chaos in what was a simple bibliography and a simple critical reading. And the student acknowledged she did it because he thought ChatGPT would make better her own critical reading. So we trust more the technology with its own limits, and we think that is more truthful than what we, with our abilities, limited or not, are able to create. So I think this is a challenge for us in education and in society. And I add one last word about the environmental consequences of using artificial intelligence in terms of water consumption, energy consumption, CO2 pollution, noise pollution, rare minerals used for the technology. The places where these data centers are built, and then the promise of works that do not materialize, because very few people need to work in these huge data centers. So when I check what I can do for dinner tonight, I have a very high environmental cost for this answer that is given to me in 2 seconds. And so I think in terms of responsibility, we need to be attentive to a responsible use of these technologies to protect what we think is foundational for education, for life, for the planet.
But isn't it interesting, like in investing, right? Most of us can just blindly invest, right? And I don't know what the stocks are. I just want to make sure there's a decent return. But when you start to look at, geez, this is with whom you've invested, this is what that company's doing. In a similar way, like we just go to ChatGPT, I'm not thinking about that. I want to know, like, what's the temperature on these chicken thighs, Now, I've written it down on an old school index card, so I don't have to keep using that energy when I look, but nobody's, I don't know, many people aren't thinking that kind of stuff, like what's behind the infrastructure of it. And, I also think that, we're going to have questions in a sec. Who had the hand up? Yeah, just let me get through this last question, big question here. Okay. Kristen, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. Okay, question 5 to all of you. And then we'll have our question and answer. We talked tonight about technology, human dignity, the common good. We talked about work and the dignity of work. We've talked about creativity, beauty. Ultimately, this conversation's also about formation, human formation, the kind of people that we are becoming. As artificial intelligence becomes more present in our lives, what virtues, that's a good word, huh? What virtues, what habits do we need to cultivate so that technology remains a tool in service to the human person, instead of something that shapes our desires. That's a big one. Our relationships, our brains even, and our choices without our awareness. What are those virtues and habits that we need to cultivate so that we use this as a tool in the service of others and not let it become God? And by the way, you know the story of Adam and Eve? Has anybody ever heard that story before? I always joke, but I'm dead serious. Like, it's not about Adam, Eve, the apple, the snake, the fig leaf, the garden, and the tree. Like, it's allegorical. Is that right? All right. I just want to make sure I'm in line with these guys here, you know. So, my very limited beginnings, stirrings in my brain are like, that story is so applicable to this. Just because we have the ability to take a bite of the apple doesn't necessarily mean we should. Or what does that mean if we do? What did God say in this story? Don't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We're created, we're creatures, we're not God. And that whole thing, my friends in AA, right? They're always talking, they take the three-letter word ego, where I'm in the center of all life, and when you turn it into an acronym, we ease God what? Out, right? And so we place ourselves there because we've got this ability now. And I sometimes wonder about that, regarding AI. And I don't want to be alarmist, but like, what are the habits and virtues that we need to be reminded of as we hear that story and know it's not just about the apple, the snake, and the fig leaf, so that we're reminded of who we are as created by God, and that this has been created by us as a tool, again, in service to the human person. Because it does shape our desires. We talked about some of that. What was the nice words you used?
Formation, de-skilling?
No, the other stuff. Like, instead of saying porn, you use three other like really good classroom words. Sexually explicit images. All right, yeah. So like, think about it. Something that shapes our desires. Like those kids, you listen to those kids, right? Our relationships. What is it doing? People relating with each other, choices without any real awareness. I don't, remember how Clint Eastwood said, what is he, 90 or 100, whatever he is right now? What's the secret to this? Anyone know what he said? I don't let the old man in, right? I'm almost in a little bit of that, like, I don't want the AI in too much. I want us to retain our own abilities to kind of think and process and in all these ways. Anyway, so, too much fluff?
No.
All right, let's bring it back up to the academic level. Here we go.
Great. I'll be quick so we can get to your questions. My favorite virtue in the encyclical, I think, would be solidarity. I think the way he writes about taking responsibility for one another's wounds and refusing to be indifferent. So that would be one. I think the framing of the question about desires is really apt because he's such an Augustinian. Like, there's so much Augustine in this encyclical. But kind of what loves shape us was big for Augustine, right? And I think that's big for going forward, as your question says. Maybe I would add detachment, embodied encounters off of our screens, contemplation, and to go off of Andrea's framing of this alternate vision, holy boldness.
I think it's a dangerous question to ask a bunch of theologians what virtues and habits we think we need, because honestly, it's probably a reflection of both what we think and also what we need. So I will say, I building off of what you said, Kristen, I think practices of presence are really important. Sharing common meals together. How many people did you greet today whose name you did not know, who you may have never met before, and who you will never see again? Did you say hello? Did you look them in the eyes? Because it's not just practices of presence right here around a table with the people that you know. It's being embodied with one another as a community where you may not interact, but that interaction actually is incredibly valuable. I will also say, I think fortitude in challenging ourselves to do things the hard way. Figure out how to get from home to work without your map, and if you get stuck in traffic, it's okay. Not optimizing every moment of your day around efficiency and productivity. Saying, it's okay if this takes me longer, if it's harder, if the meal that I eat is too salty. That's actually really important to the human experience. We learn from that. And then lastly, I think in the appreciation of our limits, recognizing when you can't do everything, it's a gift. I think for many of us in this kind of space, we have a lot of opportunities, a lot of ways we could choose to live our lives. And actually appreciating our limits and living into that is much harder than deliberating among option X, Y, Z. I could have spent my night here. I could have gone and done this, right? So it's being present to who you are now and saying, it's actually okay for me to go to bed right now. And then to say, not everyone has that privilege. So then what is my responsibility for the opportunities that are possible, like someone who needs clean water? That there is an act of justice, not just in recognizing your own limits, but recognizing that not everyone else is limited in the same ways that you are.
Take it a step further. Well, like, what about, you have a 3-year-old, you said, right?
I have a 3-year-old and a 5-month-old.
Oh, all right. And so, like, look, these kids are coming into this world now. Like, what about helping to form their consciences? How do we do that with all that's changing? And like, it's changing so quickly.
Yeah, great. So I saw a story last night online, because I am also chronically online, of a professor who assigned to students, undergraduate college students, an activity of reading a children's book and then writing a short summary on it. Children's book that was like 10 pages long, right? And the students still put it into ChatGPT to spit out the summary. So I think the lesson there is not just like, oh, bad students, right? The lesson there is that actually it's really beautiful to sit and read stories with one another. And there's something we're mourning there. There's a loss if that's what we are using these technologies to do. So how do you form a 3-year-old and a 5-month-old? Well, we don't have Alexa in our house. We're not teaching our children to talk to the robots necessarily, but we are reading books together.
Did you say LSI?
Alexa.
Alexa.
Alexa, do this, which is command-oriented. If you ever think about how those algorithms train you to talk, they teach you to tell people to do stuff for you. Pardon me, right? Like, I don't want my children running around being like, make me dinner, Mom.
Right.
No, like that's not the kind of formation that I want, right? So it's being really attentive to the kinds of interactions that are possible. But it's also introducing children and introducing people to alternative possibilities. Go outside, figure out how to plant something in a little pot and watch it grow. Watch it die when you don't water it, or worry about it dying when the eggplant looks like it's gonna die every time you don't water it for 6 hours. There's something really human about these practices that are important, that I think we have the opportunity to not let go of. Okay.
Andrea.
As Christy mentioned earlier, social justice really is a virtue that permeates the whole encyclical. I would also highlight verbs that seem to me point to a virtuous way of being. Cultivate certainly is one of these verbs. Cultivate the intellect, but cultivate the body, cultivate the community, and cultivate the society as a way in which we collaborate. As in any way of cultivating, we need to be patient. We need to interact with the elements that are part of the interaction, whether social or natural. And also the importance that he assigns to the verb disarm. We need to disarm, reduce our way of responding aggressively to situations, and cultivate an attitude of peace. So I would say the last part, the second part of the chapter 5, that is on the civilization of love, is, I would say, is agenda. That is a virtuous agenda. And I just mentioned the title of the paragraphs, so we get a sense of what he has in mind. We can we can all do our part. The need to disarm words, building peace through justice, adopting the perspective of victims, cultivating healthy realism, reviving dialogue, and promoting the necessity of diplomacy, multilateralism, and praying and hoping. This seems to me a sort of virtuous way of responding to the challenges of artificial intelligence and seeing where he's inviting us to focus our attention and our actions.
Well, I can't thank you enough, and I think at this point, sure, let's give a great round of Alexa. No, I'm kidding. This evening, we've been exploring some of the bigger questions about technology, human dignity, what it means to be human. And I imagine that we all have questions of our own. So if you have any, let's just be aware that we've got about 20 minutes, and we want to allow for folks to have convos. So just brief questions, and you can address them specifically or in general. And then I'll end with a couple of closing remarks and a prayer. So what's your first name, sir? Robert, hang on. It's on the, to all of our YouTube viewers, to everybody viewing through the live stream. So we want people to hear your really good questions.
Thanks. I just want to say I'm terrified, and I'm glad you've handed out this book. I'm going to read it. I'm going to find out if there are answers in there. I see what artificial intelligence can do, for example, in the medical field. And Dennis Hamabis of DeepMind, they folded all the proteins and all the possible formations and then gave it to the world. And they were able to do that because of artificial intelligence. But then I've seen what social media has done ever since, these things came out 15, 17 years ago. And I've seen the damage these have done. And I think artificial intelligence to our children, you talked about this, and I think is very dangerous. And I'm terrified about autonomous weapons. And I'm terrified about these shops in Southeast Asia that will imitate my daughter and tell me that she's been kidnapped and I have to send $1 million, which I don't have, to save her. So this world which is coming, and I'm sorry, but I'm terrified by it.
What did Carl Jung say, that with everything there's always a what? A shadow side?
You want to gather 3 questions and then we try to...
Sure, how about a couple more and then we'll answer?
I have a yes or no question. Early on, when I heard about AI, someone said, don't worry, there are no original thoughts from AI. No original thoughts. Anything from AI has already been discussed. Is this accurate?
Hi, I've actually spent my whole career working in AI. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, great. So I've spent my whole career in AI, and this is just, so everybody seems to think it's just come out of nowhere, but I was working in the late 80s. And I came tonight for the title of this about, what is really humanness. And one of the things that's not being talked about now, but I know a lot of the digerati have been thinking about for at least 20 years, about the singularity. Ray Kurzweil wrote about it in The Singularity is Near in 2005. And I've spoke to him, and I know his belief is if he can live long enough to the singularity, he'll be able to upload his consciousness. And there's a lot of folks, I know Larry Page believes this on the board of Google. And what I've been wrestling with for 20 years on this is that human?
One more from the back, or are you guys full? One more? Anyone?
Hi everyone, thanks for your thoughts tonight. I work with middle school students, and we are currently, I would say, thoughtfully discerning AI use in our school. We're a Sacred Heart school. We look a lot to talk with our girls about where God's love is and how they can bring it there. On the flip side of things, you spoke a little bit about this, but I'd love to hear more about where you see kind of hope in the field of AI, specifically in community building, community activism, and really advancing Catholic social teaching. I'd love to be able to bring some of that back to my students.
Thank you. All right, one more. That'll be the...
This wraps a bow around the last question and expands it into the future. My understanding is that the encyclical uses the word dialogue 36 times. If Pope Leo asked the Boston Innovation Community to host 36 dialogues after this panel, what would be on your list to build a civilization of love?
Did you guys get that? Can you just ask the last part again? The last part?
What would be on your list of 36 dialogues to build a civilization of love? How can the Boston Innovation Community engage that question to the global community?
In the Bible, I asked the first question on fear. In the Bible, fear is our enemy. Not the fear of getting burned if I go near a stove. The fear that dominates us, the fear that guides us. So we need to recognize that fear, a fear that disempowers us. And we need to do what we can do when there is something that we are not able to address on our own. That is to offer this to God and ask God to help us in addressing those fears so they do not have power over us. And that leaves us agency, and we have the ability of facing what is causing those fears and trying to see what is the path to address them. To say it differently, AI could be understood as a curse, but also could be a blessing. It depends how we find ways to use it in a way that is a blessing. In the same way, Babel could be a curse, but in reality becomes a blessing that is the blessing of cultures and languages. So it is up to us and to God's action to guide us in finding ways in which we do not let ourselves be disempowered by fears that block us. There is no inevitability in our Christian experience. There is the possibility always with God to finding ways to build even on the stones that the builders have rejected.
Okay, so on the original thoughts question, it's not a yes-no answer. So the way that large language models work is that they've been trained on the corpus of human knowledge, and they also have become increasingly recursively training in that they're able to train themselves. So the original thoughts, like we can debate on what the meaning of originality even is, which people do, and it's important and valuable, but the idea that there's no original thoughts in one sense is true because the foundation of the stuff that's gone into the models has been human at the jump. It's also the case that the products of what's coming out in the process of how these models work, and especially in terms of what people are thinking of now as foundation models, is problems being solved that we have not yet solved ourselves in our own ways of doing things. So whether that's mathematical theorems, or like AlphaGo is the great example of like a chess moves that we have not thought about. These are examples of machine learning algorithms solving problems and thinking things, but thinking is the wrong word because they're machines computing things that we have not resolved ourselves prior to that. So it's not as simple as a yes-no answer, but that complication actually makes us ask questions about what it means to be human, which will lead me to your question over here, which is it true that at some point we hit the singularity, we upload our consciousnesses? Is that humanity at its pinnacle? Jesus says no. So the good news of the gospel is that Jesus came to proclaim the good news of liberation to the poor, and in doing so became flesh. Nothing else. That flesh is meaningful in the Christian tradition. And whether it's just human flesh or the flesh more widely of creation, existence, there is a very important theological statement that I think I hold to, and I invite other people to think with me on, which is that our embodied life as humans is meaningful for us, not just because we want to live forever in a dematerialized material matter of silicon chips, but because we're actually made to live forever in friendship with one another and God. That's what we're invited to. That's the hope that we have as Catholics and as Christians, or as believers of any type who can commune with one another. That's what you encounter when you share a meal. And that's what I think in many of these discourses we lose when we think that like excellence of humanity is to exist on a computer forever. I've never desired that. And I think that's probably a gift in some of the ways of how I've been formed as a human in communion with others and in relationship with the church and having had loving parents and a spouse, right? But then that's something that can be a witness in what we have to share with the world.
Thank you. Oh, do you want to talk to that?
I would like to add a few more things to what Berit was indicating. So for those who are less familiar with the term singularity, it is like a hypothetical moment where we will have a technology that we never had before, that will give us possibilities we never had before. And in the philosophical and technological field, there are those who advocate for this as a goal that we look forward to. They are defined, even by Pope Leo, as post-humanist and transhumanist. So ways in which we go beyond our humanity as it is now. What it is interesting is that they have an incredible number of elements that come from the Christian and religious traditions, but they are emptied of their value. For example, immortality is, as you were indicating, the possibility of uploading our brain in a computer that will live in a transcendent way in the cloud forever. So an interesting way of, again, focusing on immortality, eternity, and transcendence, but without the value and the meaning that we associate to these terms. And as Berit was saying, our faith is embodied. The central mystery of our faith is the incarnation, God becoming human. And we encounter God encountering our humanity. And God encounters us in our limited bodies, in our faulty history. And another key mystery of our faith is the resurrection of our bodies. We have no idea how that will happen, but again, it affirms the importance that in our faith, our bodies, as they are, have, at the point that they will be in the glory of God, in communion of saints, as risen bodies. So we could say that it is interesting to see how we need to do a lot of work in appreciating the gift of our bodies, the gift of the resurrection, the gift of an eternity given to us freely, in a social context that seems to think that they need to appropriate this, but emptying of all the elements that are considered problematic, like vulnerability, aging, disease, limitations, and so on.
Thanks. Maybe a brief word or two about the last two questions. Right in the back, who teaches at a Sacred Heart Middle School on Hope High? I think we have Sacred Heart High School teachers here as well tonight. I can appreciate Sacred Heart and other schools, including other Catholic schools, engaging in discernment about thoughtful AI use, I think you said. And certainly, I can think of disciplines other than my own. There's a colleague of ours at Boston College who's just published a book on how to teach with and in an age of AI, where it could be to the good, to the flourishing. I guess I would also encourage thoughtful discernment about what AI not only does for your students, but to your students. Again, I feel like at middle school and high school ages, more than undergrads even, there's such an opportunity for formative education that I think the questions Pope Leo is raising here, like I said, exposing some of these invisible, especially impact on the mental health of young women at these all-girls schools at the middle and high school, beyond some of what was already discussed tonight, I think is a real opportunity. So I guess I would say that. For myself, I went through a mobilization of shame pedagogy, not to be recommended, where I would list the environmental impact, tell them what they were paying for a single class at BC, tell them they don't want to outsource the very joy of learning, that writing helps you think, to just finally admitting this temptation is too high, the use is too ubiquitous, I'm gonna scrap the way I've taught in the past, eliminate the temptation, and I'll say the reason I'm sharing that is that a sign of hope for me, I felt like that was a risk and an experiment, and could go horribly wrong in terms of their resentment. But I found such hope in students this past semester saying how grateful they were for a space where they were free of this, where they couldn't have electronics, where their intellectual engagement in community and the messy working out of ideas together was what was a bigger part of their grade. I mean, I have my chair here. I also had blue book exams and oral exams for the final. But I just think it was news to me that there would be relief and appreciation by this generation. I love the final question on dialogue appearing 36 times in the encyclical. I think that's very appropriate because even at the press conference when they released this, I remember Pope Leo beginning saying, this was born of listening, this was born of dialogue. scientists, public officials, parents, teachers. And I think that's what, at its best, kind of the social encyclical tradition is. In terms of 36 dialogue, don't worry, I won't give you 36. I think those are obvious places to begin, right? Or some of the groups we've talked about tonight, labor and AI, environment, formation, conflict resolution. I guess I would also like to see dialogue with people maybe resisting AI, like I just mentioned with some young people left behind by AI, excluded, unemployed by it. I think the last thing that would get me from babble, that was my answer, and maybe the first gentleman who said I'm just terrified can relate. That has gotten me has moved the needle for me a little bit, is raising a child with special needs and seeing the difference that some technologies can really make in the learning. So that's moved me toward ambivalence. And so I think disability communities would be another, or disability rights, disability educators would be another important site of dialogue.
I cannot thank you enough for not just being here, but for the expertise, the experience, the intelligence, the engagement, everything that you bring. And I also want to thank Scott. You know, this guy in the light blue shirt back there, he and Anastasia. Mary, where are you going? You're on staff. Get over there too, right? But this guy, Scott, does, you know, these bulletin blasts that go out every week, and, you know, reading, and we're interacting, and the bulletin and articles, and this. I just would like to acknowledge you and thank you for all that you've done, Scott. This has been unbelievable. And you know, just coming here, when I was talking with Nicole, and Nicole had to leave, but she's joining with us via the live stream. Nicole, Scott, Mary, Lisa's here providing chowder, and just the whole team. Just having this gathering, you guys showing up in the middle of the summer to be here tonight says so much about you, and about you giving your time. And where we're going. And I actually would hope that we could continue this, you know, like maybe in the fall when you're not busy. You know, do you know what I'm saying? Like, just to kind of further the discussion, because there'll be so many students back too. But I don't know, Barrett, Kristen, Andrea, I want to go back to school. I want to be sitting in a classroom. I can feel my mind, like it's like going to the gym. You know what I mean? It's like just listening to you all speak and engage, and what a gift. So how about a hand for the three? So just a few last words in a prayer, and we're doing something that we never do here at St. Cecilia, and that's end on time, and in fact 2 minutes early. Whoa. I'm going to try to do that on Sunday, but anyway. The conversation this evening is way more than just a conversation about artificial intelligence, right? It raises questions about technology, but the deeper questions about ourselves. And this has been a lifelong question before AI and well after. Who are we? Who are we? Did I do that right?
I liked it the first one better.
Did you? You know, I could never, say on the phone, call Charlie Sullivan, because it would be like, it would call somebody else, like Carly somebody or something, or whatever. So I have to call Charlie Sullivan, and I have to put Oz in where they don't belong. But anyway, who are we, right? Secondly, what gives our lives meaning? Meaning and purpose, right? And then third, as we work those things through and develop, how do we take care of each other? How do we take care of one another? Ultimately, how do we remain faithful to the dignity that God has given to every human person? it's really not just about AI and technology. It's about what kind of people are we called to be and to become. So thank you for stirring so many things up in our minds, in our hearts, our spirits, and how to recognize the presence of God as the pace of technology speeds up. There's a beautiful prayer, and I would like to invite one of you guys to do it. So, not that I'm trying to like abrogate my responsibilities, but it'd be good to have a woman's voice as we're praying here. So, anybody?
Good and gracious God, we thank you for bringing us together this evening, for the gift of thoughtful conversation, for the wisdom shared by panelists, and for the questions that continue to stir our minds and hearts. As we leave this place, help us to remember that every advance in knowledge and every new technology must always remain in service to the dignity of the human person and the common good. Give us wisdom when we face difficult choices, courage when we are called to speak for those whose voices are not heard, and humility to recognize that no human invention can ever replace the love, compassion, and presence we are called to offer one another. May we continue to grow in faith, to seek truth with open minds, to love with generous hearts, and to recognize your image in every person we meet. We ask this through Jesus our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. Grazie tante. So thank you. And thank all of you for being here this evening. Fantastic. You're beautiful. This is what this great community is about. Not just St. Cecilia, but all the communities from which we come. So help yourselves. I think there's still water and cookies and all that.